Hello there, faithful listener. You've tuned in to Season 7 of the Bible Explained podcast. So make sure to grab your cup of coffee, because today we are going to be discussing the book of 2 Samuel. Hello and good morning, friends and faithful listeners, and happy Friday. I hope that you guys have had a fantastic week so far and have a fun weekend planned with lots of nice weather for you guys. But today we're going to read all of 2 Samuel chapter 4. It's a very short chapter, but it talks about some important things moving forward into David's story. So let's read this out of the World English Bible or whatever version of the Bible that you prefer. Also grab your delicious cup of 7 Weeks coffee, the coffee brand that supports life in the womb. It's called 7 Weeks Coffee because at 7 weeks old, the little baby in the womb is the size of a coffee bean. And so I just find that so cute. And also they make a delicious cup of coffee, though I haven't been drinking coffee in quite some time, unfortunately. But the times when I did get 7 Weeks Coffee, when my health was better and I could drink coffee, it was absolutely delicious. Speaking of health, on the recent episode I did with my sister called Discussions with Jen and Jamie, I talked about my health crisis that I'm going through right now and some of the things that I have been learning through it and applying in my life, not just spiritual things, but also food and medicine and herbs, and how those things have been affecting me in a positive way. But the Discussions episodes are only available to those who are members on Ko-fi. So make sure to check out Ko-fi and sign up for either the T tier or the coffee tier to gain access to the Discussions episodes. All right, faithful listeners, let's go ahead and read 2 Samuel 4. Once again, this is out of the WEB. When Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands became feeble and all the Israelites were troubled. Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite of the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth is also considered part of Benjamin. And the Beerothites fled to Gittim and have lived as foreigners there until today. Now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news came about Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel, and his nurse picked him up and fled. As she hurried to flee, he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. The sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, went and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ish-Bosheth as he took his rest at noon. They came there into the middle of the house as though they were fetching wheat, and they struck him in the body. And Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. Now when they came into the house, as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him, killed him, and beheaded him, and took his head, and went by the way of the Arabah all night. They brought the head of Ish-Bosheth to David to Hebron, and said to the king, Behold, the head of Ish-Bosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. Yahweh has avenged my lord the king today of Saul, and of his offspring. David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, As Yahweh lives, who has redeemed my soul out of all adversity, when someone told me, Behold, Saul is dead, thinking that he brought me good news, I seized him and killed him in Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house, on his own bed, should I now require his blood from your hand and rid the earth of you? David commanded his young men, and they killed them, cut off their hands and their feet, and hanged them up beside the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ish-Bosheth and buried it in Abner's grave in Hebron. I actually think this chapter is really sad because, yes, Ish-Bosheth was an illegitimate king, but this is a terrible way to die. And even David knows this at the end. And honestly, I am 100% on David's side here with how he handled this situation. But we'll talk about that in a moment. It says that Saul's son, Ish-Bosheth, heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, and his hands became feeble, and all of the Israelites were troubled. So in the last episode, we learned about how Abner was killed by Joab. Joab had this grudge against Abner because Abner, during a battle years beforehand, had killed Joab's younger brother. So Joab never let it go, and he killed Abner, even though that was murder, because Abner did not want to kill Joab's younger brother, but Joab's younger brother was trying to kill Abner, so Abner acted in self-defense. But Joab didn't care about that. He was just angry that his brother was dead. So he killed Abner, and it says that David forced all of his men to mourn after Abner. In fact, David was very upset about it. He was very angry at Joab for killing Abner. Just as we see David getting angry anytime anyone kills someone who is a leader in Israel. David always is super angry about that because he believes that vengeance is for God and that God appointed those Israeli leaders. And if God appointed those leaders, certainly God wants them alive. That is what David believes. So David was never going to raise his hand against a military leader. And you might wonder, well, then why was David going to battle against Abner for so many years? Well, it's very possible that Abner was the one who was starting the majority of the fights. It's very possible because we actually see that Abner was the one who instigated fights. But I don't think that David ever wanted to kill Abner, and especially never wanted to kill Ish-Bosheth. Because don't forget what David actually promised King Saul many chapters ago, back in 1 Samuel. Saul, when he was pursuing after David, had actually apologized to David at one point and was like, David, you know what? I am very sorry. I'm sorry that I'm pursuing after you. I'm going to leave you alone. And I just ask one thing of you when you become the king of Israel. I ask that you do not kill my offspring. And David said, I am not going to kill your offspring, King Saul. And David took that to heart. He never did kill King Saul's offspring. And so I don't think David ever intended to kill Ish-Bosheth at any point in time, because that's just how David was. So now somebody else ends up killing Ish-Bosheth. It says that Saul's son Ish-Bosheth had two men who were captains of raiding bands. So these guys were very high up. They were brothers. They were named Baanah and Rechab. And they were sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, who was of the children of Benjamin. So notice that these two brothers, Baanah and Rechab, were Benjamites. The tribe of Benjamin was where Saul was from, and also Ish-Bosheth as well. And yet, these two men decide to kill Ish-Bosheth. So I'm going to jump down here to verse 5. It says that Rechab and Baanah went and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ish-Bosheth as he took his rest at noon. Apparently it was very hot, and siestas have been pretty popular throughout all of history, especially in very warm regions. People like to take a nap during the hottest time of the day because it's too hot to go out and work in the sun or be out in the sun. So Ish-Bosheth is taking his midday nap, and Rechab and Baanah decide to kill Ish-Bosheth. It says they come into the house, the middle of the house, as though they were fetching wheat. And it says that they instead went to Ish-Bosheth's bedroom and killed him while he slept and beheaded him even. So Ish-Bosheth's own men, his own countrymen, decided to kill him. Why? Because Ish-Bosheth was now the weaker king. Because don't forget that Abner had died. He was a very powerful commander. He had a good reputation in Israel. And so when Abner died, it says in verse 1 that Ish-Bosheth's hands became feeble and all the Israelites were troubled. Because even though Abner technically left Ish-Bosheth, I think Ish-Bosheth was hoping that Abner was going to come back and still be on his side. But when Abner died, that was no longer possible. And so that's why Ish-Bosheth was so afraid. It was because Abner had so much power. So now when the Israelites hear that Abner is dead, these two brothers, who are also Benjamites, decide that, oh, Abner's dead, so Ish-Bosheth no longer should be the king. We're going to get a good reward from King David down in Judah. And that's exactly what they did. They killed Ish-Bosheth while he slept. And that's just a terrible way to kill somebody. So these men take Ish-Bosheth's head to David And they say to David in verse 8, Yahweh has avenged my lord the king of Saul and of his offspring today. And David is not happy at all. He is so angry that they did this. He is so angry that they did this. And he says to them, as Yahweh lives, who has redeemed my soul out of all adversity, which I love that. I love that David says that because these men were claiming that they had avenged King David. They were claiming that they had saved King David. And David's like, no, you guys did nothing. Yahweh has done everything to help me. You guys have done nothing. And he tells them a story. He says, a long time ago when Saul died, this man came to me thinking that he brought me good news. And I seized him and killed him in Ziklag, and that was the reward I gave him. So what do you think I'm going to do to you guys who killed an innocent man? It says actually a righteous man in his own house on his own bed. What do you think I'm going to do to you guys? And I just absolutely love how David handled this because we don't often see, I actually mentioned this in the last episode, we don't often see David punish people except for when they kill somebody who is a leader. That is the few times we see David enact punishment, is either when he's protecting the Israelites or when somebody murders an Israelite leader. So David enacts a harsh punishment on these guys. And this is exactly what I think David should have done. These guys were terrible. These guys were so terrible. They betrayed their own countrymen, their own tribal brother. They were betrayers. Why would David want these guys on his team? Because they could potentially betray him. So that's one reason why I think this was the correct punishment for David to give these guys. The second reason was because these guys really did commit a big sin. It's very possible that eventually Ish-Bosheth would have become so weak that David would have just taken the throne. And David would have treated Ish-Bosheth very well. And we know that because I'll talk about that in a second. But that's the second reason. This just did not need to be done. Ish-Bosheth did not need to die. And the third reason is because David was making an example of these terrible brothers, showing Israel that it is not okay to just up and murder people. It is not okay to just up and murder their leaders. That is wrong. And so David was going to punish people for that kind of treason against their country. And so David, of course, punished these men in the worst possible way that somebody could be punished. He kills them, and then he also cuts off their hands and their feet and hangs them up beside the pool in Hebron. Now, hanging up a body back in these days was considered the even worse than death in some scenarios. It was considered just a dishonoring of somebody's body to not bury it. And so David not only kills the men, but he dishonors their bodies by hanging them up. And so that is the reward David gives these men for bringing Ish-Bosheth's head to David. Now, Ish-Bosheth, it says that David buried his head in Abner's grave in Hebron. So Abner had just died. And so David buries Ish-Bosheth there with Abner. And honestly, that was the most appropriate place for Ish-Bosheth to be buried because he had a bond with Abner that was very, very great. Now, before I end this episode, there's another little story in here, and it's important to get to because this little boy is going to come back up soon. It says in verse 4 that Jonathan, remember Jonathan, David's best friend, Saul's son, Jonathan had a son who was lame in his feet. It says that this little boy was 5 years old when the news came about Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel. So in other words, when Saul and Jonathan died and the news came to Israel, all of the Israelites panicked. In fact, many of them fled from their cities because they believed that the Philistines were just going to come and take over all of Israel. And one of those people was Jonathan's son's nurse. So it says that his nurse picked him up and fled with him. And as she hurried to flee, she dropped him and he became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. So little Mephibosheth is fleeing with his nurse. And as she is running away, terrified for her life and terrified for Mephibosheth's life, she accidentally drops him, or she falls on him. It doesn't specifically say. But either way, Mephibosheth fell out of her arms. And he was crippled in his feet because of that. So he got seriously injured and his feet never recovered. So he was lame in his feet. And the reason this story is like mentioned in here is because this is going to come back up of how David was treating Saul's offspring. This was Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth, and David had promised that he was not going to hurt or kill Saul's offspring. David was going to care for all of Saul's family the way he promised that he would. But we'll talk more about little Mephibosheth. I get those two names mixed up, Mephibosheth and Ish-Bosheth, because it's like the same name almost. But we'll talk about Mephibosheth coming up soon and how David ends up treating this young boy. And also, friends and faithful listeners, I hope that you check out all of the links listed in the description of this episode. And sorry about my dog snoring under my desk. I don't know if you guys have been hearing him. I've been like tapping him with my foot because I'm like, wake up and stop snoring. But he's been snoring the entire time. Yeah, he has a little bed under my desk because he's a small dog and he loves sitting here while I record the episodes, and now he's just snoring away. So there he goes. All right, guys. I hope to see you all on the next episode. Once again, check out all the links listed in the description of this episode. I'll see you all on Monday. Happy listening. Have a great weekend, and God bless.